Is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Barton.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the appropriation bills before the House, and in doing so I want to celebrate the priorities of this Albanese government. Now, budgets aren't about numbers, they are also about values. Every appropriation bill tells a story about the country we are trying to build together. These bills are not simply line items on a spreadsheet, they are investments in the kind of Australia we want to be. They show what we believe matters. And what this government believes is very simple, that Australia works best when no one is left behind. The Prime Minister has coined a phrase, progressive patriotism. As Assistant Minister Hill explained in a speech earlier this year, progressive patriotism refers to a pride in Australia and an unashamed, overt focus on an inclusion and a striving for a shared Australian identity. It is patriotism that looks forward, not backwards. It is pride without exclusion. It is love of country that grows stronger the more people are welcomed into the story. Put simply, progressive patriotism says that you can love your country and believe it can always be better, because the Australian story has never been static. It has always evolved, expanded and grown. We are one, but we are many, as the song goes. And that means we have to foster a deep respect for uniquely Australian institutions, educate one another on our core Australian values and celebrate together. Australia is not defined by sameness. Australia is defined by a shared purpose. Our diversity is not a footnote in our national story. It is the story. The Australian story is written in hundreds of languages. It's cooked in kitchens that smell like every corner of the world. It is told at dinner tables where grandparents speak one language and grandchildren answer in another. And yet the values are always recognisably Australian: fairness, opportunity, respect and community. And that is why the politics of division is so corrosive. We are not angry, vindictive or divided people. We must not let imported populist attitudes and rhetoric poison our politics and split us apart. Australians know instinctively that the strength of our country comes from pulling together. And that is why this government is focused on the things that actually improve people's lives: real issues, real services, real opportunity. And for this reason, my speech today is a celebration of all the initiatives this government is supporting in order to lift up all Australians and celebrate the diversity of electorates like my own, Barton. Firstly, we are investing in our healthcare system, because healthcare should not depend on your bank balance or your postcode. In Barton, that investment has seen a 64% increase in bulk billing Medicare practices. And that is on top of the brand new urgent care clinic in Carlton, where you can walk in and see a doctor with just your Medicare card. And that is what universal health care looks like in practice. Investing in bulk billing is first and foremost an investment in frontline services, but it's also an investment in equity. It shows people in very practical terms that healthcare is an inherent right of Australian citizenship. And you have that right not because you can afford it, but because you are one of us. Our Medicare cards are green and gold. They are proudly Australian institution. And by investing in bulk billing, we are ensuring they remain so for decades to come. And in this chamber, I think we often hear, Deputy Speaker, the member for Lyons lobbying for an urgent care clinic in Taree. And you know what? And you are. And I have a lot of time for that kind of argument. Because when members advocate for doctors, hospitals and healthcare services, they are talking about real issues facing Australians. But sometimes when I listen to many of the member for Lyons colleagues, they're not talking about frontline services. They're talking about culture wars. They're talking about fear and division. Not about bread and butter issues like the access to doctors, which should be the focus of any decent opposition. When was the last time you heard a serious health policy from the Coalition? When was the last time you heard One Nation talk about bulk billing? Too many on that side are not talking about the problems facing their constituents. They're talking about the problems they are finding in their own algorithms instead. On this side of the chamber, we are listening to our communities. We are talking on their problems, and we are building the type of nation our citizens deserve. And I challenge those opposite to rise to the same challenge. Now, I want to turn to celebrating our multicultural communities. Last month, I had the privilege to attend the opening of the Museum of Chinese in Australia in Haymarket. The Albanese government is proud to have supported the establishment of this museum, contributing $2.6 million in funding. Now, the museum celebrates and preserves the history of Chinese Australians and is hosted in the heritage-listed former Haymarket Library in Sydney. But what makes this museum so powerful is not just the history it preserves, it is the message it sends. It says that the story of Chinese Australians is not separate from the Australian story. It is part of it. As the Prime Minister said at the opening, the museum celebrates a vital thread through the history of our modern nation, the long and extraordinary story of Chinese people in Australia. And as the member for Sydney, Minister Plibersek, said, it reminds us that migrants do not arrive in Australia and replace the national story. They add to it. They enrich it. They expand it. Every generation adds another chapter, and that is how a nation grows. It was particularly special to celebrate the museum's opening during Lunar New Year, and this year is the year of the Fire Horse, a time of renewal, hope and connection for millions of people here in Australia, across the world, including my own electorate of Barton. Lunar New Year is celebrated by many cultures, including Chinese, Vietnamese, Korean and other East and Southeast Asian communities. Whilst traditions may differ, the shared themes are very familiar: hope for good health, prosperity and good fortune in the year ahead. Across my electorate and across Australia, Lunar New Year is marked not just by lanterns and shared meals, but by something more enduring: the strength of community. It is a time when generations come together, when elders pass on stories and values, when young people learn the importance of respect, hard work and belonging. And for many families who migrated to Australia, Lunar New Year is also a reminder of resilience. It reflects journeys of sacrifice and courage, the courage to leave behind everything familiar, but the courage to build a life somewhere new, and the courage to hold on to culture, language and identity along the way. Because multiculturalism in Australia has never meant leaving culture at the door. It means bringing culture to the table. And when every culture brings something to the table, the whole country is much richer for it. And that is why celebrating multicultural Australia is not just about festivals or food. It is about recognising that modern Australia has been built by people from every corner of the world, and the Australian story is still being written. Every migration journey adds another page. Every community adds another voice. Every generation adds another chapter. Across Barton, local organisations hosted Lunar New Year celebrations including CAS, Cogra Storehouse, Advanced Diversity Services, Can Revive and the Bayside and Georges River Councils. They have been planning these occasions for many months, practiced their own celebratory dances, red packets were ordered, invitations sent, speeches prepared. And most of this work is on volunteer basis. This represents so many hours spent serving and celebrating others, not for personal gain, but the love of one another. These organisations play an extraordinary role in bringing communities together. They are the quiet architects of social cohesion. They support families, they build bridges across cultures, and they remind us that multiculturalism is not an abstract idea. It is something that happens every day in local halls, community centres and neighbourhood festivals. Thank you to those local organisations that made Lunar New Year so special, and so thankful to be invited and included in your celebrations. We have similar historical preservation works also being undertaken in Barton. I was proud to pledge $200,000 to restore the Hermes Ilion Hall and Library in Bexley. This space is an important place for people to come together to celebrate and hand down their Olympian culture and traditions. In turn, it illuminates another thread in our Australian story. Every culture adds another colour to the national tapestry. Every story adds another chapter to our shared history. And in Barton, Greek Australians have been part of that story for generations. They built businesses, churches and community organisations. They raised families. They helped shape the character of the local community. And the restoration of the Hermes Elion Hall ensures that their history and their culture will continue to be celebrated for generations to come. And in a similar vein, I also want to sincerely thank the Australian Tamil Congress for the generous acknowledgement of my election. To be supported and welcomed by a community organisation with such a strong history of advocacy, service and leadership is deeply meaningful for me. For many years, the Congress has worked tirelessly to ensure the Tamil community is not only seen but heard, and that contributions to the Australian story are recognised and respected. I've seen the work that they do, standing up for the community welfare, preserving culture across generations and advocating with courage and dignity on issues that deeply matter to them. The work strengthens not only the Tamil community, it strengthens Australia, because every time a community preserves its culture while contributing to Australian life, the national story just becomes much more richer. The Tamil story in Australia is one of perseverance and contribution, and it deserves to be reflected in our institutions, our policies and national conversations. And I'd like to thank Mr Rajivan, the executive and the committee of the Australian Tamil Congress for their dedication and service. And I look forward to continually working side by side with the Congress and the Tamil community into the future. Finally, I want to highlight the government's Commonwealth paid payments, because once again, this side of the House is focused on equipping young people, no matter their background, with the skills they need to enter the workforce. And most importantly, we are equipping them to enter sectors where there are real skill shortages. This policy is for students studying teaching, nursing, midwifery and social work, and these students will now receive financial payment for the mandatory placements required as part of their training. For too long, these placements force students to work full-time for weeks or months without any pay. For many students, particularly those from migrant or working-class families, that was simply not sustainable. So this reform matters, because talent should not be determined by your bank balance, and opportunity should not depend on whether you can afford to work for free. This is the first time an Australian government has provided financial support for mandatory placements. It is a significant reform and one we should be all very proud of. I know many students at Cogra TAFE will benefit directly from this policy, and the professions that benefit from this reform share something important in common. They are caring professions, professions built on empathy, humility and service, and they are the professions that hold our communities together. Now, I think of Karuna Rawat, a local in my electorate of Barton, who is a mental health nurse and also Miss Nepal International, and she is an icon. She works night shifts in our local wards, caring for some of the most vulnerable members of our community. Then she wakes up the next day to champion the Nepali community and advocate for reform in our health system. That is the Australian story in action. A migrant community member serving others. A young woman stepping forward as a leader. A professional giving back to the country she now calls home. These are the stories our investments help create, because budgets are not just about economics. They are about opportunity, they are about fairness, and they are about ensuring that every Australian, no matter where they come from, can see themselves in the story of this country. That is progressive patriotism, and that is the Australia we are building together. Thank you.